Alright, now this is the big one. On Anarchy Minecraft servers, only one thing is ever certain. Things will be built, and the same things will be destroyed. This is the yin and yang of Anarchy. No matter what you build or where you build it, its destruction is guaranteed, whether it's 100 blocks from spawn, or at the world borders, hundreds of thousands of blocks out. As time goes on, the competition to be the top faction on any Anarchy server becomes harsher and harsher. Whether you're known for your impressive architecture, or oppressive destruction, all factions strive to reach that top spot in the community's eyes. But this is not just a present day issue. Today, we go far back in time, to look at Purity Vanilla in the year that it started, and what is widely considered to be the most intense, ruthless, and destructive war in Purity's history. These two factions have had a huge impact on the server, spawning hugely successful groups, having builds displayed on the official Purity Vanilla website, and even being the direct cause of getting several players banned. Although mentioned almost daily in the server's chat, not many truly know the full story. It was the greatest rivalry Purity has ever seen. It's time to launch into Varden vs Valhalla. Before we delve into the real story of Varden vs Valhalla, we need to know where Varden started. Our story begins with a player named Adami. In mid-2019, a new player on the server, Adami settled himself down in a ravine base, which would become known as Kirtan, with a friend, Mirko Fox. Over time, he would invite more players, such as Kyle Smile, Flashes2016, and Lance Cripple, and they would become known to the community as the Varden. At this time, all they were really known for was being a small group of newbies living in a hole in the ground. One day, whilst travelling the Nether Highway near his base, Adami would meet Isabella 1999 XO. Isabella was friendly at first, giving Adami the gift of a mending book, and, as an extremely poor player, Adami was so impressed with this that he invited her back to Kirtan with him. Unfortunately for the Varden, Isabella did not exactly have innocent intentions. Isabella was an alternate account of Daddy Satan, who had befriended Adami on purpose to gain access to his base coordinates. He would grief Kirtan himself not long after, marking this as one of the first insides on the server, and the first of many Varden bases to be destroyed. However, although Satan himself would become the leader of Valhalla, and Adami would stay the leader of Varden, this grief would not be the one that would ignite the rivalry between the two groups. Varden moved on and started two new bases. One main base, which they would name Ella's Mera, situated in a jungle biome, and a recruit base named Bellatona. They would invite a player named Creeper Reaper, and unfortunately, they would be leaked again. The coordinates would find their way to the players Cody Morta and co-author, well known for their activities in griefing spawn and large farm bases. After showing up and beginning to grief, Cody and co-author would send the coordinates onto other well-known players, including the group of players who would soon form the main cohort of Valhalla. Vivid, Hux, and their friends showed up and helped grief and fight the Varden members. Although Varden members had good gear for newer players at the time on the server, they could not stand against Vivid's group, either in gear or at the time in skill. Eventually, cutting their losses, they retreated to Bellatona. But not for long. For reasons unknown to anyone but themselves, Varden members decided to bed trap one of the new grey name players in their recruit base. As many people might do in a situation of perceived betrayal, the player leaked the base's coordinates in the server's chat. This led to several players showing up at the base over the next few hours. First to arrive was Yates Rico and his friends, decked out in iron armour and unenchanted gear. The Varden members were at first somewhat threatened, but after realising that their enchanted diamond swords would kill Rico and co in a measly 1 or 2 hits, they eventually got rid of them without any severe losses. Unfortunately, this would be a brief victory. Vivid, Hux and friends returned and began slaughtering the Varden once again. At one point, even the now permabanned trash talker Ufla showed up to try and kill Adami. Kyle Smell fought as best he could, but was no match for Hux. Hux even managed to pop a totem of Undying or two before Kyle had to withdraw. This in itself was a crucial blow to Varden. Remember, at this time in 2019, totems of Undying could only be found from woodland mansions. These were rare enough on their own, but on an Anarchy server it becomes several times more difficult to find an unrated woodland mansion, let alone several. Scorned, and still feeling the sting of their previous base, the Varden once again retreated from their attackers. Vivid, Hux and co. would go on to join Valhalla not long after and began griefing bases all over the server. This was an important twist of fate for the Varden. They had been considering inviting Vivid's group to join them, having finally established themselves firmly within the community, but Daddy Satan got to them first. Other than Varden, Dawnbreakers particularly felt their impact. Valhalla would establish themselves as Purity's first notorious griefing group. The dawn of Purity was over. It was no longer just a server where people would peacefully play with their friends, and now sported an underlying political game between notable factions. Valhalla had full control over the activities at spawn, and would kill new players just spawning in, or people attempting to trade without their permission. At the time, Valhalla had the largest collection of skilled PvPers on the server, with their only rival being Ufla. Even then, he was only one guy, and still lacked skill in comparison to Hux. Spawn continued to get more and more chaotic, as Valhalla offered protection to Cody Morda, who was and still is the server's most notorious spawn griefer, responsible for an estimated 60 to 70% of the lava casts that you can see in the spawn region. Nobody could stand against them. If you wanted to go to spawn for any business of your own, you had to be sure that Winterborn and Hux weren't going to attack you on sight. Due to Valhalla's enormous influence on the server, groups began to decide whether or not they would stand with them or oppose them. The Varden stood at the forefront of their opposition, joined by groups such as Dung Beetles, Dawnbreakers, and Dumpster Dogs. Other large groups such as Build Guild had strained alliances with Valhalla. Of course, with anyone allied to a notorious griefing group, their relationship was kept distant. Although this meant that the Varden had received some support, it didn't mean that their efforts would pay off so soon. The Varden had relocated some time ago to Varden Base 2, introducing several new members, including the player Warven 2002. Warven is known on Purity as a little blunt and naive, and it started here. Not long after joining the base, he accidentally sent a screenshot into the public Purity Vanilla Discord server containing waypoints from spawn to the Varden's base. Funnily enough, this was not even the first time Warven had made this mistake. He had done the same thing with their recruit base beforehand, and this time it got him kicked. Winterborn was able to calculate the angle from where he was and the distance to the approximate location of Varden Base 2. This would mark the third grief of Varden, and now that Daddy Satan and Vivid's group had joined into Valhalla, it was time for them to finally take action against the players that wouldn't leave them be. Valhalla had recruited many members during their admittedly short stay on the server. Daddy Satan and Vivid, Hux and Winterborn have already been mentioned, but the list goes on to include well-known older players such as Mirkol C, Feraligators, and most importantly, Fairy Faye. Faye had become friends with Adami, Varden's leader, a while after joining Valhalla, and as their friendship grew, she felt like the Varden would be a better fit for her than Valhalla. On the 25th of October 2019, the Varden would arrive at Valhalla 1 after being given cords by Faye in return for her joining Varden. They would arrive when nobody was online, save for Winterborn's numerous alts AFK fishing, which were found and murdered by Flashes 2016 and Stranger J. Moving on, they griefed the base. I say griefed rather loosely, they mostly just poured water all over the place, and would get revenge on Valhalla for the time being. Valhalla didn't respond with grace, rather committed even more time from then on to finding and destroying all Varden bases that they could. However, despite their victory, Varden's inner circle was beginning to split. Adami did not participate in the grief of Valhalla 1. Perhaps it was due to his strange friendship with Daddy Satan, or solely due to his misgivings with Varden's direction. Either way, this was a key point that identified the rift between the two parts of Varden. Varden members returned to their newest base, Varden HQ, a base largely built by Varden's Redstoner and all-around grinder Lance Cripple, where they would introduce previously unheard of technology on Purity. At this point in the life cycle of both groups, Varden and Valhalla were known as the two strongest factions on the server. Although Valhalla's power was more obvious, Varden had the reputation of themselves as traitors. Valhalla members were perplexed. Varden members were somehow able to make it to and from spawn in a matter of minutes, where it would take anyone else on Purity hours to get there and back to their base. This was because Varden had created the first Ender Pearl stasis chamber on Purity. This is a common device in Purity nowadays. but back then it was a huge advantage to their faction. For those of you that don't know, an ender pearl is dropped straight down into a chamber of water, but kept bouncing at the top due to bubbles created by soul sand. When someone wishes to return to the pearl, no matter where they are in the overworld, a basemate simply activates a piston and pushes the pearl out of the bubble column, which teleports them back to their base. However, no matter what strength the faction has, they are not invincible. Very Faye, the player who had only just leaked Valhalla 1 to Varden 3 weeks earlier for Varden membership, leaked Varden HQ to Valhalla. She claimed that she had been bullied by Varden members, although they denied treating her poorly, and chose once again to betray her team. This would, of course, result in her being kicked from the Varden, as well as introduce this exceptional copy pasta to the server. As expected, Varden HQ was destroyed by Valhalla, forcing the Varden into dire straits. But what had Valhalla been up to this entire time? Well, during this time, Valhalla 1 members had relocated to Valhalla 2. Interestingly, during the period between moving, Valhalla had a brief stay at a former base of Vivid and Hux. This base was found and griefed by Faye, who had recently joined the Varden. As Valhalla members were certain that the base had not been found organically, fingers were pointed, particularly with some suggestion that Feraligators, now a server mod, had given the coordinates to Faye. This resulted in a group-wide purge of members, including Feraligators, before the remaining members moved into Valhalla 2. Varden had started yet another base, but their internal affairs had been thrown into disarray. Idami, the leader, could not see eye to eye with most of the other members. He had invited several members to the group with little to no consultation from the other Varden members, notably among them Spundra and NJZJ, and wanted to get X-Kiddu to join too. None of the current Varden members knew X-Kiddu well, and weren't sure whether or not to trust him. However, Idami managed to get a 50-50 split on the vote. Normally, a faction would decide what to do in this situation either democratically or via a lengthy discussion to ensure a fair and valid result. Idami used an online coin flipper. So, Kiddu was invited to the group, and they would build their new base, Illyria Castle. Illyria Castle's main attraction was a large automatic gold farm built by Lance Cripple, trimmed with quartz and fully decorated on the outside. And hey, you guessed it, Valhalla came again. Spundra had leaked the base due to... well, nobody seems to know for sure. Purity players are just weird sometimes. Varden was left brutalized. They had been griefed countless times in a matter of months, and it seemed that no matter what they tried to do, their group just continued to split apart. Their next base would be their last. Ilium was started just after, and almost immediately after receiving coords, Idami chose to leave the Varden behind. The remaining Varden members thought it was strange that he had their coordinates, despite not wanting to be part of the group, but didn't make a big deal out of it. After all, it was unheard of for the leader of a group to leak their own base. The remaining members purged most of the players that Idami had invited to Illyria Castle, leaving a whole host of newer players homeless. Idami took the opportunity to start the Yakuza, inviting the kicked Varden members, as well as extending the invite to certain remaining Varden members and other people in the community. This idea was ambitious, but ultimately never led anywhere. Active Varden members were outraged by this new group, perceiving it as essentially just a rebranded version of their own group, and by this point, Idami's peak in the server had passed, and he no longer had the enthusiasm for purity that he once held in Varden. Idami was not one to take their criticism lying down. He called Daddy Satan, who he had maintained reasonable terms with throughout their conflicts, and gave him the coordinates to Ilium. Varden members were not 100% sure who had leaked them. However, after careful vetting, all signs pointed to a leak by Idami, and although he denied it at the time, they still believed that he had been the one to reveal their base. With that, the remaining members decided that enough was enough. Varden would disband on the 2nd of February 2020. Valhalla had been thriving at Valhalla 2, and were glad to get their hands on what would be the last Varden base, essentially winning the war between the factions. This win was short-lived. Not a week later, conflicts regarding whether or not the group should support Kodimorda's spawn activities led to the group splitting in half. Vivid's group, along with Miracle C and Zeraxel, left Valhalla to form the Chadlets, leaving Satan with the remaining Valhalla members. He attempted to start a third Valhalla base, but not unlike Idami's efforts with the Yakuza, it fizzled out quickly. Idami would soon quit the server for good. Daddy Satan would get permanently banned, and the remaining Varden Valhalla members would continue playing in their own respective factions, mainly being split among Chadlets, Dung Beetles, and DC. Varden and Valhalla, for their relatively short lives, left a greater impact on the server than any other faction alone. They are constantly mentioned in the server's chat, and at the time of recording, I can find several instances of their mentions in the last week alone. The ideas, values, and even members they introduced still remain on the server today, and in all likelihood they will be remembered and revered until Purity's final days. And, until that point, their conflict will remain as legend, and their exploits will stand as a testament to all that Purity Vanilla offers as a server.
This young guy on top, bro. He run everything in this bitch, bro. He the best YouTuber out here, bro.